Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Plae by Hugh A. Hole. I'm in my mid-30s, and as such am required, as a rite of passage, to be obsessed with everything from my childhood. Nostalgia is my generation's biggest addiction, and I'm no different. There's only so much serotonin that can get released by rehashing Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers, though, for me at least. I tend to try and unearth those crusty, forgotten fads with long nights of combing through the internet, looking for any show, toy, or game that I half remember. And with the way fandoms work now, I seldom come up empty. No matter how much I've forgotten something, someone, somewhere out there, is its biggest fan. If I were to put a point on it, I'd say I like the obscure stuff because I feel it's those little deviations from the big stuff that had the most influence on us as kids. The child that stayed up a little too late to watch Kevin Spencer probably grew up a bit different than the one who had a dozen taped episodes of Kablam, in my opinion anyway. But lately I've found a rabbit hole that goes a little deeper, and I'm not sure how much I should keep following it. I guess I should start by asking you a few questions. You won't be the first people I've asked about this. And I found some patterns I'll outline before we get started. You are going to be a lot more likely to remember if you're 25 to 40. You'll be more likely to remember if you are from a city with less than 150,000 people. If you had a rough childhood, you will be more likely to remember. So now it's question time. It may take you a while to dredge up some memories, but in my experience, if you fit the above criteria, it's a pretty sure bet you'll have at least a fuzzy memory or two. Can you remember a place? Not an arcade or a restaurant necessarily, but a place full of activities and events for children. It seemed like a chain, but you haven't seen one since you were a child. I did. It was called the Plae Place, but the name doesn't really matter. So far, I have a list of 12 different confirmed names. Can you remember going frequently? I did, 2 to 3 times a week. Now that I'm an adult, I can't think of anyone who takes their kids to a Chuck E. Cheese 2 to 3 times per week. Can you remember the colors? Do you remember them being dull and muted? A lot of beige, brown, and orange. I did. Not colors I associate with a jovial environment. Can you remember barely being supervised? I did. 2 or 3 adults at most. I like to call these the easy questions. These are the ones that usually only get me funny looks. The rest, well, you're going to probably develop a very specific opinion on my mental state. Do you remember having to do something strange to get there? This can vary, but for me it was going to a certain corner of my house. I remember my parents being there, watching me as I stood there waiting. After a while, I'd get a feeling. Lightheaded is close, and I'd start seeing the walls open, barely enough for me to squeeze through. This isn't the only way, but it's one of the most common. Do you remember the strange rules? I don't want to overload you right away, but this is probably the facet of this phenomenon I have the most information on. The one I remember most clearly was that we were not allowed in the dark places. From time to time, an area would have a gloomy pall, like one room of foggy midnight in an otherwise normally lit building. We knew to avoid those places. Do you remember the architecture being familiar? I remember as I got older, I noticed just how much of the sprawling building was seemingly identical to places I was familiar with. The lobby, where I remember entering, for example, was the food court of the local shopping center. Different paint and furniture, and with some additions, but essentially the same space. Do you remember the wishing fountain? I remember how important it was to have coins for it, but not much else. Others have remembered a large contraption that sent a coin down a long spiral into a deep black hole that went on forever. Do you remember your favorite toy? I don't. A lot of people think this is very important in regards to the phenomenon. So much so that it's common to introduce yourself to others learning about this by the name of your toy. I have dozens of other questions, but I also am fully aware of how crazy this sounds. And I don't want to come across as just asking a mountain of incoherent questions. But there is something going on. I wish I had some kind of big reveal. Vampires, demons, a government experiment. But I don't. In fact, where I am now is wondering how much of my research is just finding attention-seeking loners online, willing to engage in what could very well be just my delusions. This isn't the first time I've looked into this. About 13 years ago, something set off that part of me that dimly recalls this place. And with the fervor of my 20s, I dove down the rabbit hole as hard as I could. I eventually hated the person I became. I didn't kill anybody. Hell, I didn't hurt anyone but myself. What I did do was go on a 2-year bender where I consumed every conspiracy theory, fringe science, snake oil, and recreational drug known to man. The thing is, as I realized more and more that there is something to this, I started to open my mind to other fringe possibilities. It was a great example of someone who let their mind get so open their brains fell out. I took a lot of bullshit as fact, fried my brains with a lot of dangerous chemicals, and generally turned into a dumpster fire of a human being. So I had to put thoughts of this place out of my mind, get my crap together, and get back to the real world. And it was surprisingly easy to do. For all the obsession this had inspired, it's not something that tends to affect anyone's day-to-day life. But then comes a plague, and I, like everyone else, have got to spend a lot of time locked in my apartment with my thoughts, and a constant influx of random information piped to me via the handful of electronic devices. It was in the comments of the closing of a themed restaurant in Toronto. There was a user who swore the name was different, while I debunked in the comments. It tossed a new spark into the pile of dry leaves that was my obsession. Old habits are surprisingly easy to slide back into, and over the past couple of months, I've been combing the internet again. A little older, a little wiser, and minus the drugs and Alex Jones. Here is where I'm going to admit a few things. I think this is only going to work if we have full disclosure. I've spent some time getting my head straight in a couple of hospitals. Ironically, though, nothing to do with the spooky aspects of my childhood. No, just good old-fashioned chemical imbalance and trauma. I'm on a handful of meds, but in my opinion, all of this just prepped me for learning how to separate reality from delusion. Exactly the kind of thing I'd say if I was crazy, I know. Next is that, honestly, I don't know how much of the information I have is solid. I do my best to try and filter, but I'm not some monster hunter or paranormal gray man walking among monsters. I'm an IT guy. I use a 3-stage system lately to filter my responses. First, I have to ignore the creepypasta and ARG crowd. I've wasted a lot of time on folks who want to collaborate on a story or think I'm the next internet mystery. Then I ignore the conspiracy crowd. This is the absolute vast majority of people who are willing to agree creepy stuff is happening to kids on a large scale. Lastly, the psychos. I don't mean folks off their meds. I mean the type of person who does believe me, then kicks in my door at 3 a.m., demanding I take them there. Yes, this happened, and if we move the goalposts a little bit, I can say it happened about a half a dozen times. Then, out of the folks left, about 1 in 4, I believe, actually had an experience. That's as far as I've gotten, though. A handful of people I trust, all of us with stories that conflict and sync up just enough to be true. I think I've made a bit of a breakthrough, though. Someone has proven to know more than myself, has offered to show me what they say is a recording of the place. I've never even found someone willing to claim this, and the person really has no reason to lie. My question isn't really if they are telling the truth, but if I want to take what I think may be the first steps down this path that I can't take back. At this point, you may have the impression that my concern is all over a vague sense of unease. No, it's more than that. Like most people that remember, I have a few clear memories. Not little snippets or feelings, but actual clear mental images of time we spent there. We tend to not share this much, even between ourselves. It's one thing to talk about some nebulous event that is just as likely as a shared delusion. Hazy memories leave a lot of room for rationalization, but those memories that stand out, they tend to upset worldviews, raise too many questions, and truly make one want to just forget. So I'm going to do something I haven't yet. Share the most tame with you. After this, you will either think I'm an idiot, lunatic, or on something. But I think I need to bring this phenomenon to wider attention. I remember thinking fictional characters were real. Not in that cute way that kids do, but because we met them. In particular, I remember Popeye. I remember this premise so clearly because I remember mentioning him from time to time around other people. My parents would always correct me, Papa, not Popeye, and leave it at that. No one questioned it, just chalking up the ramblings to the brain of a creative 6-year-old. I want to clear something up. These characters, they were not the kids' show with a coat of spooky paint premise that is so popular online. No, they had nothing to do with their cutesy names beyond some passing feature the adults at Plae passed off as what the cartoon or show was based on. It chills me to the bone, but whoever ran the place let monsters walk among the kids. And we bought it. We accepted that a shuffling 6-foot-tall creature with bloated forearms and empty eye sockets was Popeye. When you got to a place via a literal hole in a wall, somewhere that was a shifting conglomerate of places you knew, a place where rules like go to sleep when you hear the sirens are common, I guess that was just par for the course. I don't remember it killing anyone, but it was around for a few months, looming around certain children, eating something in those dark corners we were told not to go to. Most of us had taken to ignoring it, a practice that worked for most of the characters, but others had special requests. Demands would be a better word, but I'll get to those next time. I know I'm straining your suspension of belief at this point. Well, actually, I hope I am. If I'm not, that means some of the stuff I've been saying has rang true, caught your attention. Maybe you'll remember the Plae place, or whatever it was called when you were there. I hope that's not true, but if it is, I have a feeling people like us are in for a rough time in the coming days. So quoth this raven. My darlings, this little collaboration is a fun little thing. You will find Gamma reading the next part. If you enjoy it, please go give his channel a subscribe, like the video, tell him you came from my channel. Enjoy.
A Swordsman's Confession, written by Mr. Creepy J. A Swordsman's Confessions. Firelight illuminated the inky darkness of the campsite, casting shadows over the couple figures huddled around it. A tension, fueled by distrust, hung over them as they sat across from each other in silence. Their eyes locked on the still roaring fire, watching the embers flicker and ascend into the moonlight. I appreciate what you did for me. I wouldn't be alive if you didn't come by when you did. The frail and dehydrated lost soul uttered out of obligation, his stare distant, his ragged tunic flapping in the winds, arms propped up against his knees. Don't mention it. Did what any normal folk would. A gruff voice dismissively responded, one hand scratching his overgrown grey beard while the other lay limp against his lap. Scars littered his exposed skin, some small across his cheeks while larger streaks were engraved into his hairy arms. Curious eyes enticed lips of the wanderer to ask, "What's your story then? You must be the hero, still kicking after so many fights." The old man let out a hearty chuckle, albeit slightly exaggerated. He came to a slow stop, taking a few breaths before continuing. Far from it. You wouldn't be so much of a kiss-ass if you knew what I've done. Try me. The wanderer's eyes rose to meet his. A fiery desire burned behind them. Oh, alright. Just don't go telling anyone. You have my word. He raised an arm across his chest, in an over-the-top manner before resting his head in his hands, hanging on every word. The old man leaned back on his log, staring into the sky before leaning forward again. I was a blade for hire, a mercenary of sorts. Money was tight, so I'd take any job that came my way, mundane or impossible. I didn't care. Don't get me wrong. I knew my way around a blade, but I couldn't handle half the jobs on my own. The audience member interjected. So, what do you do? I'm getting there. Settle down. He took a moment to collect his thoughts again. I found a crew. Not the most conventional group, but we got the jobs done. We had a lizard man for navigation, a few humans and an elf we found alone in a goblin cave. She was covered in blood when we found her. Apparently killed half of them in there with sticks and stones before scaring away the rest. His decrepit fingers grab at his spear again, stroking it as one will stroke a frightened animal. We work well together. Stayed together a long time before we got that one. That? What? He stared for a moment at the fire, still petting his spear. It was an extinction job. Kill first and ask questions later. Some village had rabid animals terrorizing them, so we had to take care of it. It was supposed to be easy money. I'm guessing it wasn't. You could say that. We tracked them down to their den. Some caved in the middle of nowhere. Our lizard man told us to be careful, but we didn't listen. We walked to our deaths in there. Some nasty bug got to their young and did some work on their bodies. What kind of work? Did it kill them? I wish that's all it did, but that's the thing. It brought them back after it did them in. Really pushed them to their limits. Hundreds of rotting killing machines waited for us. Do you know what it's like to face your death in the eyes? Other than hunger pains, not really been in many fights. His words came out meek, perhaps shy at his inexperience. His eyes shifted around the campfire, watching the embers die down. It's their eyes that you notice first. They're always so hungry. We never stood a chance. I made it out by throwing the elf to the hounds. I'll never forget the screams as I ran out of the cave entrance. I was the only one who survived, and the last job I ever accepted. They shared the silence, listening to the dying gas up the fire. I've just been going town to town, doing good where I can. It's all I have now. It was hours before the fire fully gave up its struggle for life. The smoldering remains painted ash gray and tender orange. The old man finally rose from his seat, kicking dirt into the pit before climbing into his haphazardly crafted tent. Alone. The noises of the night playing an elegant melody for his slumber.
Thank you so kindly for stopping by my chateau, my darlings. It does mean so much to me. Please, if you have not subscribed, as many of you have not, please do so. Give me a like so I know what you would like to hear. And comment. I always love to read your comments. And special thanks to my Patreon and membership supporters. Ciao, darlings.